If he was a philosopher, Swami Abhedananda was no less a patriot. In fact, after Swami Vivekananda, he was the patriot saint of India of superior stature. That Abhedananda will be regarded by posterity as the patriot of a unique type must have been borne in upon the minds of those who have studied his life deeply. Dr. S.N. Das Gupta, the eminent scholar and philosopher of India, has observed that during the time he was in America, he had occasions to see for himself the achievements of Abhedananda as the leader of the Vedanta movement. He writes, "In recent times, when we lost all faith in our ancient culture as a result of our subjugation and we accepted the Western science and the Western mode of life as our ideal, it was then that Vivekananda went to America as a standard bearer of Indian culture, and he was soon followed by Swami Abhedananda, who had the boldness to present the image of India in all its pristine glory to the people of the West. I have personally seen that in his task of preaching the glory of ancient Indian culture and civilization, he gave no quarter and asked for none. He upheld the glory of India while engaged in his mission in Europe and America for more than 2 decades, in such a way as only a patriot is capable of doing. Anyone who has read his book, India and Her People, will admit that Abhedananda was first a patriot and then a philosopher. His lectures in India during 1906 and afterwards bear an ample testimony to his deep patriotism. But at the same time, he had his own ideal of a patriotism. And for a fuller study of his political thought, one should read his famous article, which he wrote in Bengali, and which was published in the famous political weekly of the time, the Atma Shakti. It was in issue number 24 of 1925. The article is entitled Tarun Bangla Adarsha, or The Ideals of Young Bengal. Every word of it breathes patriotism, and the whole piece might be regarded as his political will and testament. He knew that no country would advance politically unless led by an ideal leader. And by this he meant a self-sacrificing leader who accepts renunciation as his creed. This is why he was highly impressed with the sacrifice of Deshbandhu Chittarajan, whom he hailed as the ideal leader. He once wrote, "Follow him. If you find any such man who has dedicated his life, his everything for the welfare of his country and his people. A leader is never made. Some are born as leaders. A real leader must be one having strong moral and exceptionally ideal character." On his return to India, Swami Abhedananda sensed the rise of new forces as revealed through the non-cooperation movement led by Mahatma Gandhi. Deshbandhu and others also were part of it. Similarly, it did not take him long to realize after the Gandhian movement was played out that Subhash Chandra Bose was the rising star on the political horizon of India. When Bose was elected president of the Indian National Congress, which was his virtual political coronation, Swami Abhedananda was then lying seriously ill at his Muth premises in Calcutta. He was equally impressed by the sacrifices of his political heir, Deshbandhu. He felt a strong desire to see Subhash Chandra, who at once responded to the Swami's request. One day there came in the Vedanta Muth Subhash Chandra, the Congress president, and he went upstairs to see the alien Swami. As soon as he entered into the room, Abhedananda wanted to embrace him. But lying prostrate on his sickbed, it was extremely difficult for him to fulfill his desire. Subhash Chandra stood near the bed. Abhedananda rose up with great difficulty and said affectionately, "Come on, Subhash, let me embrace you." The young patriot was moved beyond words at this loving gesture of the world-renowned disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. He stood speechless. It was an unforgettable scene. As he slowly held Subhash Chandra in his affectionate embrace, Swami Abhedananda blessed him with these words, "Be thou victorious." Afterwards, the Swami is reported to have discussed with Subhash Chandra about the situation in the country, and he replied to his queries with the humility and childlike simplicity. When India is going to win her freedom, when will that happen? To this question of the Swami, Subhash Chandra said, "It is not so easy, Maharaj, to remove the heavy stone of subjugation." Subhas remained with the Swami for about an hour on that day. Abhedananda had great hopes for the future of his country, which found expression in many of his utterances both in India and abroad. His faith in the regeneration of the people and in the part he was to play in it was something innate, intuitive, and unshakable, proceeding from the firm conviction that today or tomorrow India was bound to achieve her independence. Were he spared for another 7 or 8 years, he himself would have witnessed it for himself. One should go through his works carefully to realize the dulled aspect of Swami Abhedananda's genius as a lover of his country and as a teacher of the highest spirituality, and his ultimate reconciliation of both these conflicting ideals in his realization of a new order of things. And when comes to analyze the national significance of his life and work, one will be amazed to find that though intensely patriotic, yet Swami Abhedananda was not blind to the demands of the higher humanity, full of reverence for the past, yet keenly alive to the changed circumstances of the present. Nationalism to him was not a political supremacy or the acquisition of rights and privileges, or to have a voice in the government of the country, but a sacred ideal, as he said, whose inmost striving was to express its own conception of ideal manhood. And in this sphere he resembled his brother disciple, the great Swami Vivekananda, who said, "Man-making is all the task to which I want to devote myself." He was indeed the very embodiment of the true Indian spirit of the nation. Throughout his life, he held the torch of his country's honor aloft because he drank deep at the fountain of Indian culture. He must have foreseen the day when culture and not political ideal would become the mainspring of Indian life. And herein lies the true significance of the eventful life of the patriot saint of India. Finally, I will endeavor to relate Swami Abhedananda's thinking to conceptions inherent in much of our contemporary religious experience and thought. The emphasis in his teaching is on the fundamental unity of all spiritual experience. Beginning with the ancient Hindu conception of the oneness of the self with the divine, Atman with Brahman, he gives oneness new significance by relating it to the functional dependence and union that exists between all particular and individual existences and the universe from which they derive their being. In spiritual consciousness, this relation finds its highest expression. Despite the discordant character of much of this worldly experience, Abhedananda is convinced that the power and influence of man's enjoyment of this union with the divine must become manifest in enriching and harmonizing human relations. Since all derive life and inspiration from the one source of power, the operation of the power in them must be revealed by deep fundamental unity in their ways of life. Essentially, a man of divine knowledge or realization, Abhedananda, in all his philosophical utterances, laid special emphasis on the absolute necessity of faith, which, according to him, is the cornerstone of all religions. It is the foundation of all creeds. Faith is indispensable to man, for without it he cannot proceed forward on his journey through the unknown. At the same time, he also makes it clear by painting out that faith ought not be imposed. It should come as a free perception on an imperative directive from the inner spirit. For a better and clear understanding of the deep philosophical thoughts of Abhedananda, the readers might obtain a sound idea from two excellent books: the Tirtha-Renu, which is the collection of the teachings of Swami Abhedananda, and the Abhedananda Darshana, the philosophy of Swami Abhedananda, written by his disciple Swami Prajnaananda. The first book contains the essence of the discussions which the Swami used to hold on Raja Yoga, the royal path, along with the Gita and the Upanishads, while he was staying at Eden Hospital Road, where the Vedanta movement formally came into being. In the opening chapter of this book, he presents a synopsis of the Swami's philosophical thoughts on various subjects, which will help for better understanding of the subsequent chapters. And the Tirtha-Renu contains untold spiritual treasures, which Abhedananda gave away freely to all seekers of truth and knowledge. The Abhedananda Darshana may be considered a limelight for a comparative study of Abhedananda's philosophy of thoughts and spiritual ideas. What is the message of Swami Abhedananda that he has left us for posterity? As Carlyle said, no great man lives in vain. And no great man leaves this world without leaving behind some sort of message to inspire the future generation of people and also to illumine their minds. Sri Ramakrishna has left behind him unique gospels, and so did Vivekananda and Abhedananda. Both of them were living commentaries of the life of their master, who himself was the epitome of all knowledge. We also know that both Vivekananda and Abhedananda rose to their full stature and became respectively vehicles for the transmission of great power. The more we look at the inner spiritual being of Swami Abhedananda, the more we see him in his full glory as the teacher par excellence, for whom the most vital issue of the age is whether future progress in humanity is to be governed by the modern materialistic mind or by a nobler pursuit of enlightened spiritual culture and knowledge. As a seer, he is convinced that so long as human consciousness remains predominantly egocentric, life will remain much as we see around us, as a conflict and difficult accommodation of divided opposition, of differing forces and divergent ideas which cannot arrive at the knowledge of their necessity to each other, or grasp their place in that unity behind, which is expressing itself through them. At the same time, he is convinced there is no other way by which the diverging and conflicting world forces can be transmitted and brought into an inner unity of purpose and effort for the progress of mankind. But he is confident of the eventual issue, for all individual being is come from the Absolute One, and there is that in nature and in man that makes for ultimate harmony. When, as a true Vedantin, Abhedananda says that the realization of God is the highest aim of our life, our souls are but reflections of God. True religion begins with the realization of God's existence. What he actually means to say is that God consciousness is a stage in the spiritual progress of man. As he said, it is that stage which man must strive to reach if his long pilgrimage on earth is not brought to naught. Let the humanity march on its search for truth and knowledge, and let it walk in the light instead of the darkness. If it does, then only we should think that Swami Abhedananda did not live in vain, or his advent was without any significance insofar as spiritual evolution of mankind is concerned. And as we come to a close, it was Sister Nivedita who once said, "These two names, Vivekananda and Abhedananda, are names as inseparable as is the confluence of a stream, as are reverse sides of a single coin." And this is truly so. Both of them were the messages of the lofty gospel of their master, and both the souls were illumined by the light of intense realization. All the direct disciples of Ramakrishna were individuals, but they were united in the love for each other. As preachers of Vedanta in the West, the performance of both Vivekananda and Abhedananda are unique. But at the same time, there was a gulf of difference in their approach. Dynamic by nature and somewhat restless in work, Vivekananda as a preacher presented the unforgettable picture of a warring monk from top to toe. As a leader and originator of the Vedanta movement of Ramakrishna Movement of the West, Vivekananda gave no quarter and asked for none. Both of them discovered the soul of America, but one notices a remarkable difference in the methods of their discovery. It is true that without a Vivekananda or without an Abhedananda, the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna would never have traveled outside India. At the same time, it is equally true that without the efforts of Swami Abhedananda, extending over a quarter of a century, Vedanta would not have its roots in the soil of America. While Vivekananda burst upon the earth like a hurricane, Abhedananda appeared on the world stage with a sovereign calm that drew around him millions of truth seekers in both the continents of Europe and America, as well as India. On hearing the maiden lecture of Abhedananda in London, it was Vivekananda who said to him, "You have a resonant voice with carrying power also." The Western world heard this voice for 25 years, and it felt its tremendous carrying power, which reflected light and not heat. Of all the people, it was Vivekananda who knew very well that the work started by him would need a man of high stature to carry it to perfection. At this distance of time, it is not possible for anybody to realize the true nature attained by Abhedananda throughout the years of his continuous work. So we quote below a few lines from the farewell address given to him by the inmates of the San Francisco Vedanta retreat, which was his handiwork when he left America forever in 1921. "Although there are many teachers among us, still we have not found another like you, who has such a vast treasure of wisdom and such a deep spiritual wisdom, and who has the power to awaken the divine consciousness in the earnest souls of seekers after truth. Therefore, we feel that in your absence we shall be sailing in troubled waters in a ship without her captain, and cannot bear the thought that you would leave us so soon and go to India." This was the preacher Abhedananda who won the hearts of millions of people in America, and won it in a way which was entirely his own. While there was some element of awe in the dazzling personality of Vivekananda the preacher, it was just the opposite with Abhedananda, who was graciousness incarnate. He too had a dominant personality, but at the same time he combined in him natural graciousness and inner strength, which cast a spell on those who gathered round him. The comparison of these two dedicated lives will not be completed without a reference to the impact of their respective preaching of the Vedantic doctrine. Any evaluation of the interpretation they gave to Vedanta, or any estimation of the influence they exerted on the life and thought of America, is bound to fall short unless we take into our cognizance the fact that both Vivekananda and Abhedananda were conscious of the noble heritage of India, and this perhaps enabled them to give their best to bring about the spiritual synthesis in a world tormented with chaos and confusion. Together they represented a great, glorious, and majestic self, Atman, which was fully illumined by the light of lights that Ramakrishna was. Together they sang in joy the song of eternal life, and together they preached the message of universal spirituality and love.